So what we are going to do we have a 3-hour time period here. The second half, I'll start in the second half and move to the first. Second half is going to be an engagement exercise that our friends and colleagues from TD Insurance are going to present to you. They're going to lay out some of the issues that they see as important in their particular field, but also important from a public sense. But in this session, this is the first part of the session, we've normally in this time period had one guest speaker. I'm really going to overwhelm you with 4 guest speakers, and all of them have extraordinary backgrounds, and so they may be competing, they may even get into disagreements, and I hope they present points of view that challenge your thinking about subjects. So the first 2 are 2 colleagues of mine from McMaster University, Dr. Gail Krantzberg and Dr. Velma Grover, and I mention them because Gail and Velma, along with myself, were authors of the I'd like to say best-selling, but I don't think it was, book, The Regeneration Imperative, Rebuilding Built-in Natural Assets. And they have extraordinary backgrounds in a whole bunch of fields. Dr. Krantzberg at McMaster is one of, I wouldn't just say Ontario, but I'd say North America's specialists in knowledge about the Great Lakes and how significant a place that is for us and for the people who live in this area and people who live around the world. Dr. Velma Grover is an international specialist and has literally taught all over the world. So we're glad to have her with us today to share her insights. For instance, she's worked with the United Nations on a variety of different projects. Next is Mr. Todd Latham. He is the publisher of Renew Canada magazine and Water Canada magazine. And I and a number of our colleagues here have known Todd for many years. He is, first of all, it's pretty damned extraordinary that he's able to publish a magazine that survives from years to years to years, because we know that the publishing business, to coin an expression, ain't what it used to be. It's a challenge, and I'm sure Todd will perhaps talk to that. He's has particular insight into infrastructure and some of the major projects that have been undertaken in Canada and that will be undertaken in the future. And then Mr. Christopher Hume. You may be familiar with Christopher from his work in the Toronto Star. He's now a columnist. I think he writes more now that he's retired than he wrote when he was actually employed at the Toronto Star. And he most recently wrote about the Downsview swale, and he's been looking at low-impact development and things of that sort. And he said he was going to make some points up here that might cause people to think twice or cause friction. So I sure hope he does. The other distinction is we went to the same high school, back in the before digital technology was invented. Maybe that's the best way of framing it. And finally, Mr. François Langevin is the AVP of Product Innovation and General Insurance at TD Insurance, and he's going to join us at the front, and he is going to be one of the leaders, along with Neil Warren, in the second half of our afternoon. So I'm going to invite Gail, Velma, Todd, Chris, and François to join me on the stage. Just so my panelists are aware, we have 4 mics. This is kind of like, we need an extra chair here. If we could just have an extra chair. Alex, did you grab one for us? Thank you very much. Good. One of these days I'll learn to count. It's such a useful exercise to be able to count. So what I wanted to do is to give each of our panelists an opportunity to kind of present the challenges before us. In terms of climate change, in terms of climate adaptation, in terms of the major theme of this event today, which is what we call deep resilience, which isn't the term resilience. Oh, thank you. The term resilience has multiple meanings, but for us, it's really about the hotter, wetter, wilder world that has been described and defined by the City of Toronto Resilience Office that we want to deal with. And I know our colleagues at TD Insurance told us that this was the most significant event from a claims point of view, weather-wise, in the last year. Can anybody imagine what that event in the Greater Toronto might have been that was the most significant event that they experienced? Yeah. The windstorms, right on. Do you remember the day? Yeah. May 4th. It was on May 4th was the big windstorm that, as it were, blew through Toronto. So that was one of the most devastating. The other thing that's rapidly changing about this is just the way we think about these issues. I was in a hotel in Windsor about a month ago, and there was a sign on the elevator that said, in the event of fire, we were on the 18th floor, in the event of fire, do not take the elevator, take the stairs. Well, they got to change that sign. And they now have to say, in the event of fire and water, do not take the elevator. Anybody know why? Do you remember this? You've forgotten already? The two guys that almost drowned in an elevator in Toronto in a basement parking lot when the elevator basically stalled in the basement and it began to fill up with water. So if there's a big storm coming, you may want to avoid it for water reasons as well. So I'm going to turn the mic, I'm going to turn over this flicker. I'm going to ask Gail to lead us out in this discussion and just to give us a bit of an overview, Gail, of the issue.
My slides are on.
Slides over there.
Good morning, good afternoon. That was a good start, right? Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much, Bill, for the opportunity to join you here today. I have very few slides here. I just want to give you a sense of what the climate is doing to where we live. And we live in the Great Lakes region, obviously, all of us are here, and the implications of a changing climate to the Great Lakes are profound. We will find periods of prolonged drought, increased severity of storms, like Bill was just talking about. We will exceed the ability to handle sewage, so we'll have raw sewage spilling into the lakes. So, for example, do you remember when the beaches were closed in the spring a year ago? The beaches were closed, you couldn't get down to them because of the flooding. It was a major storm. It was like massive amounts of rain in April, and tens of billions of liters of raw sewage went into the lakes from cities like Toronto and other cities. This is very serious. Because what we get them is nutrients, pathogens, viruses, contaminants. We've worked really hard to try and get those out of the lakes, and now all of a sudden with a changing climate, these flows, these severe storms, make this stuff go back in. We have combined sewers where you have sewage and water together. So you have your sewage from your sewage treatment plant, you have the water that's collected on the street, they go to the sewage treatment plant together, but if there's too much stormwater, they bypass, and there goes more raw sewage and more nutrients and increased sheet runoff. Our streams blow up. Basically, the water just goes outside the barriers of the stream. So if you happen to be living in a floodplain, you will be underwater. Meaning human and wildlife habitat are seriously degraded. Water levels, in most situations, the modelings are telling us that water levels, because the lakes are going to go down, shorelines are going to recede, wetland habitat will dry up, and this has implications for boating, for property ownership, for recreation, for transportation and commerce. For example, if you have a vessel coming into the Great Lakes and is moving cargo around, it needs a certain level of depth of water. And for every inch it loses, it must take off cargo. So it's losing tens of thousands of dollars for every inch of water you take out of the lakes for it to go through. The reason water levels are going down, I mean, we were just talking about severe storm events. But in a changing climate, we'll see what happens this winter. In a changing climate, the winters are getting a bit more mild, and the lakes don't freeze up as much, and they evaporate. And the rains that we get in the winter aren't turning into the snowpack that should melt in the spring and feed the trees when the trees need the water. So it's just a crazy cycle of rain in the winter, lack of snow, and the lakes being able to evaporate in the wintertime and ultimately decrease. Temperatures could increase, which means less oxygen could permeate the water. We're seeing blooms of algae. We're seeing changes in the thermal habitat, meaning if we had cold water fish and the temperatures go up, those cold water fish don't like that. And we have a very important recreational fishery. The recreational fishery for a cold water fish is worth billions of dollars, $7 billion every year. We can lose that. So the other thing that temperature does is species that come from away, sounds like a play, come from away. Species that come from away can find this a more hospitable place, and invasive species could expand instead of be eradicated. And I'm really touched by the opening remarks about changes in my backyard. I'm really worried if this winter is mild, how many of those invasive insects are going to overwinter and decimate my crops in the spring. Okay, we'll go on. So there's some research that we need. We need to know how climate is going to change, how ecosystems are going to change over time because of climate, so that we can put in adaptation strategies to make them to make the ecosystems more resilient. We need to understand climate change predictions. How accurate are they? I mean, the predictions are that the lake levels will drop, and right now we're at record high. But these are long-term trends, right? So when you hear about a changing climate and the temperature is going to go up, and you have a freezing cold winter, don't let that fool you. These are trends in time. This is not temperature. This is climate. This is not weather. This is climate. What about human health issues in warmer weather? I heard Kathleen McKenna this morning say that because of severe heat, people actually died in Ontario this summer because of severe heat. Can we predict ecosystem changes because the way that water flows is changing? And how do we then predict how we plan on how we use the land? Because how we use the land affects how the water flows over the land. And if we are doing land use planning better, we'll make way for water to go down into the ground rather than run off in sheets like it does in Toronto and the Humber River and the Don Valley and so on. So what it is time to do now is to respond to the climate change challenge, build systems that are more resilient. This is the tip of the iceberg. I just thought it's not a question of whether or not climate change is human-induced. Again, we need to act. So with that, I'll thank you.
Thanks, Gail. I'm going to go to the end of the row now with Todd and ask him to give his perspective as a guy who kind of writes about this on a regular basis and publishes two extraordinary publications on the topic. Todd?
Thanks, Bill. There are copies of both Renew and Water Canada over there. There's not many, so I guess it's first come, first serve. Happy to give you those copies, and if you send me your email, my email's got to be at the end of this. I'm happy to send you a digital edition. When Bill asked me to come and speak today, I had no idea how long I was going to have, so I've actually prepared a 45-minute presentation, but I am not going to go through it all. I have a lot to say, but in this format, I think I'll just keep it really brief. Those were the kind of the 5 topics I was going to bring up today, so I'm going to fire through these slides. I might miss some of my salient points, but you can come back to me afterwards if you see anything that kind of grabs your attention. So first off, sorry, going too fast. Wow. Clock is ticking. We all know that. Pretty obvious. The IPCC report says we've got 12 years. That's pretty ominous. There's a lot of other sort of factors at play. It says it requires nothing less than a total and rapid reversal of our present direction as a civilization. Wow. Right? It's your job. Language. We use the wrong words for what we're trying to do. I hate the word sustainability. I hate the word sustainable. What does it mean? It means nothing. It means it's flat. It means keeping the same thing over and over again. We don't want to do the same thing over and over again. If somebody says, how was your marriage? Oh, it's sustainable. Ouch. So why do we use it for what we're trying to do here? So let's change the words. Resilient is a good word. Smart is a good word. We're beyond the eco and the green. We need to think of better, more active words that describe what we're trying to do. What are the true costs of things? If we don't put the value on the things we use, we will not value the things we use. So we're in a throwaway society. If somebody says that straw is an extra 5 cents, you would say, I don't want a straw. But straws are in every single drink. Why do we buy bottled water? It's convenient. You can get tap water cheaper. I see some of you with bottled water, some of you with tap water, others with coffee. Start thinking about what you're paying for and value that. Gas should be $2.50, $3 a liter. That's what it is in Europe. We're subsidizing gasoline. I would have talked a lot about the true costs, and this is asset management, and I know Wendy's going to be speaking on asset management to her class next semester. I advise you all look into that term, asset management. It's what municipalities are doing, and that's the future of how we're going to tackle climate change. This was a poster from a Bernie Sanders campaign during the election. And it just hit me. It's like, wow, it's so true. You know, our banks are failing. We better bail them out. Billions of dollars were spent to save the banks, to save Bombardier, to save all these industries. But are we devoting the same attention and urgency to our environment? Know your facts. Watch out for fake news. I'll let you read some of these. This is a slide I presented to a grade 8 class, and they just started howling because they immediately got it right away. You know, water will kill 100% of all of you who drink water because we all die. So, I mean, that's one thing to kind of twist the stats, but also be aware of where you're getting your news. I think sometimes we're in a little bit of a cocoon. Sometimes we're in a little bubble on what we like to hear. We're in this echo chamber where we listen to only the things we want to hear, and anything else that is not what we are used to hearing, we assume is not correct. So listen to other points of view, listen to other people, even if you don't think they're right. Speaking of facts, this is actual survey that was done by RBC. Sorry, I'll go back. It was an interesting study that RBC did. They surveyed, it's called the Water Attitude Survey. 69% of people think there's a problem, but 58% of the people don't want to pay for it. So there's a huge disconnect with the actual facts of the environment and what people are willing to do. And this is a fun graphic, obviously. That goes back to what I was saying before, that we're not truly paying the costs of what we use. And this, maybe we need to think of things differently. As a marketer, as a media guy, I always look at different ways of framing this. So does anybody know of diamond shreddies? Ever heard of them? This actually happened. So this box came out on the stands, and people were like, oh my God, there's a new version of shreddies. I gotta get it, I've gotta get it. And they went out in the street and they interviewed people. Which do you think is better, the square shreddies or the diamond shreddies? Oh, the diamond shreddies are way better. It's the same thing. So maybe we need to market this differently, you know? Anyway, think about it. This goes back to perceptions and facts. Governance and leadership. I'm a big fan of benevolent dictatorship. Basically says if you know 90% of your population is for you, to hell with what the 10% say. And I think what we're happening now with populist governments like Trump and Ford, the 10% are actually wagging the dog here. So we really need to bolden our leaders to do what's right and not worry about the few people that say, oh no, our prices are going to go up, and oh no, I don't want to pay a gas tax or a carbon tax. We got to do the right thing, and we need leaders who are going to do that. I love this graphic because it's typical politician, right? They get the fresh hat, they get the brand new mallet, they smack some things, and they go back to doing what they used to do, which was nothing for the most part. And then I just want to leave this with you because I knew I was going to speak to a group of students. I'll probably just leave that up on the screen for a while. Be a successful person. And I was mentioning this to Wendy when I got in this morning, or just now. We really need to foster more entrepreneurialism, more sort of I can do it. Don't listen to naysayers. If somebody says, oh, that's a stupid idea, run away from them. Listen to what they have to say, because you're going to want to remember that, use it as inspiration, but just do it. Be bold, be creative, and be an entrepreneur. I'm still publishing print magazines, so also be a little crazy. And that's it from me.
I was going to say the person next to you is even crazier. He's with a newspaper. I'm going to go to Velma Grover next. But just to say on that entrepreneurial side, we have two extraordinary entrepreneurs with us. Chris Navarro with the Nautilus Group, who are working on a water collection device for use in drought-stricken areas around the world. It's really a spectacular idea. And before you leave today, you should get a chance to talk to Chris and look at what he's doing. And Brandon and Stephen from Ripple Farms, and Ripple Farms are kind of leading the way in thinking about vertical and urban farming and some of the extraordinary things. In fact, they are you're effectively growing green crops and tilapia or fish in their installation, and so I assume at some point people are able to eat the fish. Yes, good, because we bumped into our president last night, and he said he had been invited to the fish harvesting, and we said, geez, that could imply that you're doing something awful to those poor little fish. But I guess if you want to eat them, you kind of have to do something, right? So we won't get into details here. I'm going to turn things over to Velma Grover. Velma, please.
Okay, I think so. I've got pretty boring facts as compared to some of the humor we just had. But I was saying every year we hear like this is the hottest year we have had so far. The temperatures are going up, and as Dr. Krantzberg just said, this year because of the heat we had some people who died in Ontario. But since I'm talking more about the international perspective, and I see a lot of you are from the countries I'm referring to, this year, the temperatures in Southeast Asia went up to like 50 degrees centigrade. We are talking about lots of people dying, not a few people dying, and that's the kind of perspective I wanted to bring in here. So although we talk about a lot of wind speeds, but I think in the end it depends on where the storm is actually falling. So I had some numbers which I want to use maybe if that comes up in the discussion. But what I wanted to bring in the point was, although a lot of industrialization has happened in some of these developing countries, in the developed countries, but people who are really suffering are the people in the developing countries. When we talk about resilience, it's people who are the households dependent on the rain-fed water. They're doing agriculture based on the rain they get, and especially in sub-Saharan Africa, where people, any small deficit in rainfall will lead to a big food security issue. So we're talking about building resilience in those places. It reminds me of a couple of incidents. So for example, in Vietnam, we're talking about gender issues and people who are dying just because they don't know how to swim. So in Vietnam, for example, it's usually men or boys who learn how to swim, and then they go out to urban areas to earn their living, and they leave behind women or the elderly people who can't protect themselves. So talking about building resilience for those people. So I think problem here is, for example, in India, I know we were traveling and you see the rivers have dried up and people have built their houses in dried river beds. So we're talking about building resilience, but you are built houses in areas where you know once monsoon comes, everything would be flooded. You talk about people who can move around if they have money, but they have no means to move when the monsoon season comes. So there are a lot of issues embedded in poverty. And I want to bring in a quote from 1972, which still holds true, from the then Prime Minister of India, Indira Gandhi, who said, "Poverty is the biggest polluter." And I think it still is. So when we're talking about building resilience, we're talking about really building capacity for people who need it at that level, where if one rain season fails, one crop season fails, they get into a spiral of the poverty which they find hard to come out from. So buildings, I would like to sort of have a couple of points here before I end my little thing, that we need to talk about loss and damage, which UNFCCC has built in their 2012 and 2013 COP conferences. And the idea is about giving aid, building capacity of these people who really need it. And let us use aid for giving them capacity to come out of poverty instead of giving them free stuff just to pass on that one season of no rain, but helping them, giving them crops which are more water, so they will use less water when they're growing their crops, and how they can build their resilience by diversifying their livelihoods. So that's the kind of resilience I want to bring in the discussion. So I guess that's...
Great, thank you very much. We're going to move on to Christopher Hume. Christopher.
Hi, can you hear me? Yes. I want to suggest something a little bit different. And I want to just make it clear that as a journalist, I'm both a cynic and an observer. So I'm not here to talk about all the great solutions that we can come up with, because I don't actually think that global warming, greenhouse gases, climate change is the problem. I think we are the problem. And that all these issues that we've been talking about are the symptoms of a larger problem, and that's us. And we could start, as Todd mentioned a few minutes ago, we could start looking around this room to see how the system that is destroying the planet and therefore will destroy us works. We can look at the plastic containers of water, which I hate to sound like an old man here, but when I was your age, the idea that you would put water in a plastic bottle and pay for it would have seemed crazy. And of course it is crazy, but it's the kind of craziness that we're used to. And I guess that's what I see as a journalist, is that craziness is normal now. We in this province just a few months ago elected Doug Ford as our premier. In the US, they elected Donald Trump as their president. If you can think of two more incompetent, more ignorant, and more inappropriate people to be our leaders, then I would be surprised to hear. But this is what we do. And I would say that every one of us, the other thing I find interesting is how every speaker has turned to you as young people and said, you are the solution, you are the answer, you're going to have to clean up the mess that my generation has left you. Well, I hate to say this, but I think you're as much of the problem as my generation. So I don't see you as necessarily having the answers, but you don't have any choice. Most of us, certainly me, I'll be long gone by the time the spit really hits the fan. Although the IPCC report gave us 12 years. You guys are still going to be young in 12 years. Now, you know, what can I say? We live in a province where the party in power has told us that they reject a carbon tax, they reject cap and trade. It's all just another crass money grab. And you ask, okay, Mr. Ford, Mr. Phillips, what's your plan? And they don't have one. So how can we take that seriously? How can we live in a world where people like that are in control? And I would say that that's the problem, and that every one of us is responsible to the degree that we are happy to accept the way things are, that we buy the bottle of water, that we vote for the wrong people, that we hop in our cars at the end of a day and drive home, etc., etc., etc. Our entire lives are based on a lie. So we have to stop telling that lie, those lies. We have to start facing the truth. And it starts with every single one of us. You know, we have a convenient habit of making these issues abstract. It's the corporations, it's industry, it's government, it's somebody far away, it's the Americans, and it is the Americans. But it's a lot more than that. It's us too. And every single one of us is implicated in this problem. And according to the UN, we have 12 years. 12 years. Now, even for young people, for whom, you know, who are going to live forever, 12 years is not really very long. So I would say that we have to get a sense of urgency really quickly. We have to wake up immediately. There is no time to waste. And, you know, there was a speaker this morning who sort of overwhelmed by the awfulness of things, stopped eating meat and became a vegan. Now, I haven't reached that point myself yet, but I wish I had, and I think that it's that kind of thing. You know, and one man turning vegan is not going to save the world, but it's a start, and it's a better start than we've made so far.
Thanks, Chris. So let's turn to a representative of industry and business and the corporate culture. François, what are your reactions to some of the things you've heard, and what are some of your points of view you would stress?
So given I'm going to talk later today, I'm trying not to steal my own thunder, so I'm going to keep some of it for later, but I couldn't agree more with what was just mentioned. I think it's on all of us to act, and now. Even yesterday I read something about debating if climate change was due to mankind or not. Who cares? I mean, if it's 60% because of us, 40% because of just nature it is, well, act on it. So looking at this crowd here, obviously young generation, I think no generation has been more connected than this one. In my own personal opinion, no generation has been more engaged at the age you're at. So I'd say, as Chris mentioned this morning, let's say you have the power. We all have the power, but I guess my ask to you, and that's the same for me as well. Vote with your dollars. If there are companies that you think should be supported because they are doing good for the planet, then buy from them. But also try to figure out which companies are doing the exact opposite, and stop buying from them. Money talks, that's the only thing in business. So that's how we're going to change. And also in terms of politicians as well, I think we all have the power to choose who we're going to elect. And again, just because the way this generation is connected, I think you have the power to change things. So we don't have to be stuck with politicians that don't believe or try to argue or divert the attention. So I'd say get involved. And if I could have another ask for you, so look at what you can do, let's say yourself. So earlier today we heard about, let's say, reducing consumption of meat, riding an electric vehicle or taking the bus and so on. So I think that's one thing that we can all do. But also, what can we do collectively? Because as it was just mentioned, there's no such thing as them. We can't wait for them to do something. It's us, and we have to be part of the solution. And let's face it, we're all part of the problem to different degrees, but I think we need to be part of the solution as well.
Thanks, François. So let me put a problematic to our panel, our expert panel. and suggests that, okay, we know that one of the direct factors in greenhouse gas emissions, which in turn are causing the rise in temperatures, are a direct result of our carbon emissions that are the result of our industrial production, our transport, our buildings, et cetera. On the other hand, that carbon has made so much modern use of energy possible so that we are now more prosperous than ever. We live longer. Children don't die, and generally speaking, except in countries that are unable to match our living styles. But people generally live to an older age. They live longer. In fact, here's the real problematic. Figures would indicate that the higher your eco-carbon footprint, the greater the human development index is in your country. In other words, you live longer, you go to school, your kids live longer. How do we square that circle? Does anybody want to tackle that one?
Surely our prosperity is achieved at the cost of others' poverty. We are as rich as we are because other people are as poor as they are, and not to reduce everything to a zero-sum game, but we have more and we have as much as we have because others have less. So we happen to be sitting here, the beneficiaries of the way things are organized. Others in different parts of the world are not. So if this conference were being held somewhere different, Bill, the points of view would be quite different. This would be us, you people in the West, stealing from us, stealing our lives, our health, our longevity, our happiness, so that you buggers up there can live the long, happy lives that you do.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. I'd like to add, first of all, the notion that you can't protect the environment while having a thriving economy is false. The other thing that I'd say is that I think the innovation that we see now in technology can pull us out of this. I think we had really bad technology that got us to be very rich and very dangerous. I think we have, I believe, some of the solution will be technological innovation that'll get us into a carbon neutral territory while still maintaining healthcare and so on, a thriving economy. In fact, I would imagine if we had breakthroughs in technology that provided energy that was carbon neutral, that we would sell it around the world and make a bunch of money.
Todd, you're a man in the infrastructure business.
Yeah,
What's your response?
Yeah, I want to take umbrage with the sort of whole bottled water thing. I mean, yeah, it's not ideal, but I don't know how many people in this room know how much water is wasted by municipalities. 40% of the water that is pumped through pipes in the city of Toronto is wasted. So in the city of Guelph, I know this for a fact because I just heard it from a colleague of mine who works there. City of Guelph just elected a Green Party person. What was his name? Shriver, is it? Yeah. The city of Guelph wastes more water, leakage through pipes, etc., than all of the water bottlers in Canada. So when you say, oh, bottled water is killing our planet, no, it's waste that is killing our planet, and it is asset management that will save it. So we have to do better at pumping, treating, and conveying our water, not just our water, but all of our energy, but do a better job of being more resilient with our energy, being more efficient with our energy and our water. I think that's one of the biggest solutions.
Go.
I don't mean to monopolize the conversation, but you're comparing apples and oranges, Todd, and everything you're saying is true. But the fact that we waste so much water through our own incompetence doesn't justify water bottling as an industry. The water bottling industry is, as far as we know, about 20 years old. People survived for thousands and thousands of years without bottled water. In this city alone, which hasn't been around for thousands of years. I know we managed to survive without bottled water. The point is that you could bottle water and sell it and make the bottles returnable. There are so many easy and obvious ways to deal with these kinds of issues. And you know, this is called the Anthropocene. I mean, this is a man-made problem. The pipes will be fixed, the plastic bottles will become glass, and they will be able to be returned for money, blah, blah, blah. Why don't we do it? Well, we don't know the answer to that, but maybe Bill does.
Well, I want to ask Velma, I mean, we've talked about carbon and prosperity, and is it not true that people in disadvantaged, for want of a better term, parts of the world would really, if they had anything in life to aim for, they'd love to aim for our lifestyle? Is that not the case? And if so, what are the implications from an environmental perspective?
Right. So just to answer your point, I think the idea about everybody striving to achieve the Western standard is creating problems. So for example, if we see in China, everybody wanting to own the car with a population over 1 billion is creating a problem, and it will have a huge implications. But I wanted to flip your original question about having the Human Development Index and sort of relating that to higher Human Development Index, higher carbon economy, and da-da-da. But maybe the index, when we started measuring all the countries by GDP, we realized that was a wrong index. And we switched it to the Human Development Index, and although it might be a little better than GDP, but maybe that's not the actual index we want to measure people's life and happiness with, and that will bring me to my point. Like, there is another index called Happiness Index, where countries like the US don't top the list as they do in the GDP. But there are smaller countries like Bhutan who would top that list. So it's also a perspective of how you want to look at it and what index you want to use. And as they say, use statistics to either make your point or lie. And you can use the type of, the number you want to use. And I would say we can change the index from Human Development Index to the Happiness Index and maybe switch how we look at life.
So don't mean to be provocative, but I think it's somewhat of an intellectual shortcut to think that, let's say, the carbon will lead to prosperity. I think it's actually the other way around. Personal opinion that, let's say, because there's prosperity, we're buying those expensive cars and running on fuel and all that. So I'd like to challenge the way it's phrased. And also I'd like to challenge the fact that I think, let's say, taking cars as an example, it's easy to use gas cars. As a, let's say, as a country or we're global citizens, I think it's much more complex to all drive electric vehicles. But still, I think we wouldn't be less rich in Canada or North America if we would drive electric cars, and I think our CO2 emissions would be lower. So,
Velma.
I just wanted to add to that. I think when you're driving electric vehicles and sort of propagating that, my main question is, where is electricity coming from? So if you're actually using a coal generating plant so you have basically moved your pipe emissions from one place to the other, but the carbon emissions are still the same. So unless we really come up with a clean, innovative energy, it sort of, I think, makes sense to maybe change the way we are producing electricity would be really important.
yeah, that's a good point. I think it needs to be green electricity for sure.
But Bill, where has this great wealth got us? I mean, we're talking about cars. The big issue one of the big issues in our election in Toronto is that congestion is so awful that people can't get anywhere. It's quicker to ride a bike, for God's sake, but we don't like riding bikes because it's hard work. So
Well, and because a car might kill us. So that's,
well, there's that too. That is a problem, I realize. We are all stressed out because our houses cost so much, most of us can't afford them anymore. We feel we're lucky if we have a job. that doesn't end in the next 2 months because that's when the contract's up. John Tory, Mr. Enlightenment himself, announced that he'd learned through the course of the campaign that actually mental health is an issue. It suddenly dawned on his worship that this is the reality of life in 21st century Toronto, a big city. So where has this great wealth gotten us? And I mean, I know we're not going to become Bhutan tomorrow morning, but this kind of mindless search for, and quest for more and more and more bigger cars, faster cars, et cetera, where has it gotten us?
I'm going to go down the road now, and I'm going to ask each of our panelists if there was one thing, and it can't be bottled water. We're going to take that off. That's how it's go. If there was, and it can't be asset management either, because you had your shot at that. But if there was one thing that you would, argue strenuously for, what would that be in terms of addressing some of these obvious issues that they're constantly facing us? Todd, we'll start with you. And while we're doing that, I want to start inviting you to be part of this conversation. So if you would just not be shy and put your hands up. Did I see a hand? Hands anywhere? Hands up? Start putting your hands up, because if not, you'll just have to keep hearing from me and how wonderful carbon is and prosperity and what's wrong with bottled. No, I'm just being rhetorical. That's anyway. Take it away, Todd.
The one thing would be true cost accounting. I think we need to pay for the things we use. If you want to use highways, toll them. If you want to drive a big gas-guzzling vehicle, you got to pay more for your gas. I think we got to direct human behavior by the pocketbook.
I guess you're asking, should it be a carrot or should it be a stick? That kind of thing. I have
Beat them with whatever you want.
a stick.
So he's pro-legislation, probably. I'm thinking more pro-financial.
I say I choose the stick. The carrot's nice, but I don't think it works.
Yeah, well, I totally agree. I think we've tried many different ways with the carrots, and I don't think it's going to change. And to the earlier point by Todd, I think to pay for the true cost, not only for the, let's again, taking the gas price, yes, that's the cost of the refinery and this and this and that, but there's way more, and we should be paying for this. And there, maybe the carrot would work, but until then, I think the stick is probably a better option.
I'm going to take a totally different spin on this. And I would say I think we need to change the way how we measure success and our materialism definition. Right now, when you look into the society, people are like, how bigger a house we have, how much bigger the car we have is how successful you are. But if we change how we measure our success to being like how happy or how much satisfied we are in life, which doesn't just come from materialism, because I always say those things are temporary, so the happiness and satisfaction from those things are temporary. So if we change how we measure success, will change how we live in the society, because it is we, as we say, we have to start the change from us, and we have to change the way our lifestyle, how we live, and how we measure our success, and I think that is going to probably change the way we use things and how we just move away from the throwaway society to maybe a better way of living.
Everything that needed to be said has been said. So I will just add that you leave this place today and you do something different. And you talk to one other person and convince them to do something different, and get them to talk to one other person and convince them to do something different. And you cause a chain reaction of doing one thing different, and collectively we make a difference.
I'm a big proponent of the idea that we know that Canada has a biocapacity to eco-carbon footprint ratio of 2:1. And biocapacity are all those good natural ecological services, everything from bees pollinating crops, insects, trees, sequester carbon, store water, provide shade, marginally lower temperatures, but collectively they do a good job in that. Provide oxygen, fresh water, all of those topsoil that's necessary for growing crops. So in Canada, we have, for every one eco-carbon footprint, and that's all the use of resources we make, all of the carbon we emit, our ratio is 2-to-1 of biocapacity to eco-carbon footprint. So clearly, as Canadians, we are the greatest people in the world because no other industrialized country can make that claim. Is that true or not true? Do you buy my argument? It is 2-to-1. That is an accepted fact. Yeah, is there any problem with my conclusion? Yeah. One factor, and what's the other factor?
The size of the country.
Big country. We're a big country, small population. So sure, we have a 2-to-1 ratio. Used to actually be 3-to-1. So I mean, this is my point of view. Everyone has their own point of view. I would argue that because our eco-carbon footprint will grow, that's unquestionable. We're going to continue to drive cars. A lot of people are going to continue to eat meat. People will fly around the world. We could stop those things today, but that's not going to happen. That our commitment as a country should be, as we urbanize, as we get more people in the country, as our prosperity improves, et cetera, that we should commit to maintaining that 2-to-1 ratio. I don't have the solution to do that. I just think that becomes a bit of a parameter that we could, as a country, live up to. And what does that mean? That means we do everything we can to have as many beehives as we possibly can. We've started that at Seneca. That means we start using our green space in front lawns and backyards for something more than simply front lawns and backyards that have nothing growing in them, that we plant trees, that we restore wetlands. We had a speaker yesterday that indicated that 75% of the wetlands in the Greater Toronto Area have been paved over, and not just for urbanism, but for agriculture as well. We tend to romanticize agriculture, but if you look at Ontario's agricultural production, about half of it is for potatoes, not for eating, well, they are for eating, but for potato chips, corn chips, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I like potato chips as much as anyone, but what else? Soya. What does soya go for? What do we use the soya for in large measure? Cattle, for feeding cattle so we can have hamburgers. And corn. What is corn grown for? Because we like, to put butter and salt on it in August and eat it, or what's the primary use of corn? Industrial sweeteners or ethanol, right? To drive our cars. How ironic is that? So that's kind of where I'm coming from in this. So here's an opportunity for you to either make your own comment about how dare these old people at this front tell me how to live when they've made such a mess of things, and maybe that's implied. So you have a question, a comment? Great.
So I know a lot of the way that we're trying to plan for our economy and everything goes more technical, like voting with our dollars and stuff. But coming from an international view, how can you deal with things that are culturally or religiously used in a place? So, for example, the Ganges. I know they have a lot of, it's a big religious thing. They throw in the ashes and everything, and I know it's a big thing for the Indians, but how can you possibly work with that in a way to make it more sustainable?
Don't use that word.
Oh, sorry. Smart?
Go ahead, Velma.
So I think the main problem with Ganges, like people have been throwing ashes in it for ages and ages and ages, but the problem started with when the raw sewage from a lot of industries started coming in. And I guess part of the development process, people were not thinking, they just, even now, a lot of times, it's hard for you to say, well, when you are putting in all that raw sewage in the river, that's the water you are drinking. People do not associate with what they are doing, actually. So for them to think that's the same water which is going to come to me and my family, so till it has started hitting people with all the high cancer rates, people were not really associating the two things together. I think there have been a lot of efforts done in India by either changing the way that the industries were working. The raw sewage is not probably going the same way. But when it comes to making money and your bottom line, it is hard to convince people. So I think more than legislation, judicial activism has worked in India quite a bit, where they've moved some of the factories from, so for example, Delhi away to other countries. But you're right, when you are in that development stage, you were in for making money and not thinking about the impact it's going to have on you. But I think India is making a progress in improving the water quality in that river, but the state it is in right now, it is probably going to take a little longer than we thought.
I mean, we all have cultural practices that have environmental impact. Look at all the ice rinks that we freeze in Canada so that we can play ice hockey, right? It permeates our culture. Is there any way, Todd, that we can deal with those kind of, I wouldn't call them contradictions, but just challenges that our cultural practice, the things we truly value, also have environmental impact that we might want to question how much of that we should be tolerating?
Well, in case of ice rinks, is water the only way to fill them? I don't know. Maybe there's innovative ways to create ice rinks. In case of the Ganges, I think it's education. I think if you draw a little infographic that shows waste going in and then somebody drinking downstream, people will start to get it. So education is a big part of it, telling people the real costs of things. I'm not going to harp on that too much, but more of, the impacts that we have as a society. Yeah.
Great. We have a question here.
I had two questions. The first one is, did the old cap and trade program work, and did the math actually work out? And the second question is with Trudeau's new statement on taxing pollution, and does the math actually work? Meaning, does the incentives of not polluting and buying a smaller car actually outweigh, buying a bigger car?
I know nothing about this, but he's handed me the microphone and I can't resist. You know what? I think it does work. I've heard on the radio 15 times in the last 2 days that one of the winners of the Nobel Prize in economics has made it clear to the rest of us lay people that cap and trade is the best single way to cut down greenhouse gases. Why? Because it puts a price on carbon. So we're talking about the carrot and the stick. This is a classic example of a stick. I think that the problem with Trudeau is that, and isn't it interesting how it all boils down to politics? We're talking about nothing less than whether we can keep the planet inhabitable, in a way that we're used to, and yet there's the conservative point of view, a liberal point of view, then there's the Greens, and then there's and on and on and on it goes. You'd think that at some level, at some point, the truth and nothing but the unvarnished truth would dictate how we behave, but apparently not. So as far as I'm aware, listening to the radio and reading the newspaper, and as I said earlier on, I'm a journalist, not an expert, big difference. It works, and clearly the reason that we dropped it in the province was all about ideology, specifically conservative ideology. And basically the attitude is, screw that, it's a tax, we hate tax, tax is awful. If it weren't for taxes, we wouldn't be sitting in this room. This is a school. Who pays for the schools? I know you guys pay a whole lot for tuition, but it's the government that pays. It's us as taxpayers who pay for schools. I don't have a problem with that. I actually think we should pay more taxes because I think we'd get more for our money. The issue isn't that we are taxed, but how our tax money is spent. And more often than not, it seems that it's not spent intelligently. There's the problem. And nobody wants to say, no, you can't do this, you can't. But at some point, there's no alternative. And that's what leadership is about. And I ask you, who is a leader? Can you tell me? Who do you look up to as a leader? Is it Doug Ford? Is it John Tory? Is it Justin Trudeau?
Gail, I want to, maybe you could talk about politics at the Great Lakes, because there's a really classic example of something that you would think everybody would be in favor of, quality water in the Great Lakes. But what are some of the challenges that we face from a political point of view, just in terms of their future and the problems associated with so many places around the Great Lakes?
Climate change mitigation is not going to help the Great Lakes right now. The lakes are changing. So developing adaptation strategies to climate change is imperative, and we have a federal government that is committed to doing that. They're putting money where their mouth is. They're looking into research on better understanding how to adapt to this changing climate and make the lakes more resilient, as we said before. Taxing, carbon, cap and trade, all good things will not help our Great Lakes. They may help them 50 years from now, 100 years from now, but we need the help now. And there are binational efforts, there are working groups, teams of people, scientists, academics, government people working together on figuring out how to adapt to a changing climate. And it's slow, but at least it's recognized as a priority and it's happening despite Trump, right? So Trump wants to kill every single thing that Barack Obama did for the Great Lakes, and every time he brings it forward to kill the budget, he can't do it. So we have our money on the US side secured, and on the Canadian side we could use a lot more, but at least we have a binational plan, commitment that is working.
Hello. I just wanted to add a comment to what you just said. I've been doing some reading, and a lot of people tend to confuse climate change and global warming. With that being said, climate change is real, global warming is not. It's been proven. When it comes to human impacting climate change, it's actually a little bit less than 5% of the entire carbon emitted by the planet itself. Science has showed that we've been through a phase of I forgot the name for it, when we went to an ice age, and now the stage of warming up. Climate change is inevitable. There's very little that we can do about it. We don't contribute a whole lot to it. Taxing carbon on it might sound like a conspiracy theory, kind of like a way of embezzling money, if you ask me.
Well, that's a controversial point of view. Who wants to tackle that one?
I'll just start by saying I disagree with your science.
Yeah. Yeah. Todd?
Well, I have to echo what Chris was talking about. We've got to, use. You asked whether cap and trade was working. It was $3 billion that was raised through the cap and trade program, and now Ford's got to find a way to find that gap. Where was that money going to come from now that there's no cap and trade? He doesn't have a solution. So, whether Canadians are contributing this much or this much, we still have to do something. And driving behavior change through a cap and trade or a carbon tax is the best way to do that.
So we're going to wrap up now, but I would suggest that Todd mentioned that sustainability is perhaps not the right word to use to describe our responsibility, our engagement with issues, our accepting that our impact in so many ways. I will reference, and please, it's only a metaphor. Please don't take me too seriously here. There was a learned judge in Chicago, Potter Stewart, who was once asked in a courtroom, in a court of law in Chicago, to define pornography. And he said words to the effect of, "It's hard to describe, but you know it when you see it." And I would argue the same goes for sustainability. It is hard to describe, but you know it when you see it. And these are two splendid examples over here, the aquaponics installation that our Ripple Farms people are working on, and the water collection strategy that our students have applied in the Lotus project. So I want to thank Gail, I want to thank Velma, I want to thank François, I want to thank Chris, I want to thank Todd. They're not going away, they're going to be here over the break. We're going to take about a 15-minute break. François and his colleague Neil are going to come up and lead us through the second half of the afternoon session. And I want to thank you for your attention, your engagement, your involvement, and we'll see you in 15 minutes. Thank you.